Drafts are a funny thing. While prevalent in North America, it can be seen as a bit of a foreign concept to a lot of people, mostly association football fans. But in most closed league structures, it can help to increase parity and give everyone a fighting chance for the future. NPB is no different. NPB instituted a draft in 1965 after complaints from several Pacific League teams that were unable to sign young talent. That first draft was a complete, unmitigated disaster. One that will get a video of its own once I do a bit more research. But long story short, the vast majority of players rejected the teams that drafted them. Which leads to an interesting question. What happens when a player is drafted by a team they explicitly do not want to play for? Do they refuse to sign and try again? Do they push for a trade? Do they attempt to grin and bear it? One way or another, it will always lead to controversy. Most recently, Shohei Ohtani created a stir when he announced that he wanted to jump straight into MLB, Tazawa rule be damned, before eventually relenting and signing with the Fighters, who'd taken a flyer on him in the second round. But that incident was nothing compared to the 3 major draft scandals that rocked NPB in the past. And at the center of them were 3 kids named Takashi Arakawa, Suguru Egawa, and Masumi Kuwata. Takashi Arakawa was born Takashi Idezawa in Iwamuroda in Nagano Prefecture in 1947. Iwamuroda was a small farming town that was later absorbed by Saku. He started playing baseball at the age of 4 and quickly became the best player in his town by far, as well as being a straight-A student. He told his parents that he wanted to go to Tokyo and play baseball there, but being rice farmers, the Idezawas did not have the money to sponsor him, even if he was good enough. They tried to discourage him, saying that while he may have been the best in the countryside, he'd face much stiffer competition in Tokyo. However, Takashi persisted. He nearly single-handedly dragged his junior high to the prefectural tournament, where he met Hiroshi Arakawa. Hiroshi Arakawa had been a decent outfielder for the Mainichi Orions, and had just been hired as the Giants' hitting coach. When Arakawa saw Takashi play, he knew he was special, and when he found out that the Idezawa family were unable to help him fulfill his potential, he put forth a proposal. Let me adopt him. Hiroshi Arakawa had already mentored the great Sadaharu Oh, and by then Oh had broken out as one of the best players in NPB. If anyone was going to give Takashi the correct tutelage, Hiroshi Arakawa was the man to do it. Takashi's parents eventually relented, and Takashi Idezawa became Takashi Arakawa. Arakawa enrolled at Waseda Business Academy in 1962 and immediately made the team as a first-year shortstop. Instead of declaring for the 1965 draft, he moved up to Waseda University and dominated the Tokyo Big Six League, quickly becoming a top prospect on a stacked Waseda team. In time, he fell in love with Tokyo, and when the 1969 draft came around, he made it official. Before the draft, Arakawa did something unprecedented. He made his intentions known. He put out a public statement. He would only consider offers from 2 teams. His adoptive father's team, the Yomiuri Giants, or the team whose stadium he played in while he was at Waseda, the Yakult Adams. The Tokyo Whales said, "I bet," and drafted him 3rd overall. When they called him, nobody picked up the phone. Takashi would hold his ground. He would not play a single game for the Whales. Naturally, Whales fans were beyond miffed. The Arakawa household was flooded with letters and phone calls threatening him, but Takashi would hold firm. Letters were even sent with razor blades in them so they'd slice the hands of anyone who tried to open them. This harassment continued all the way through December, and then it got so much worse. On the night of January 5th, 1970, Takashi Arakawa decided to walk the family dog alone. The night air was calming, and he enjoyed the brief respite from the media circus that he'd created. But 2 men were watching him that night, and they had other plans. 2 Whales fans had made good on their threats. When Takashi awoke, he was in the hospital with a fractured skull and a broken hand. The men had hit him in the back of the head with a baseball bat and stomped on his hand for good measure. As you can imagine, this only hardened Takashi's resolve. Why the hell should he play for a team whose fans had tried to kill him? Takashi went to the United States to train away from prying eyes basically as soon as he was healthy enough, and the Whales, now on the wrong side of public perception, were finally forced to relent. On October 7th, 1970, 2 days before the deadline to sign him, the Whales finally signed Arakawa on the promise that he'd be traded to either the Atoms or Giants before the year was out. To drive the point home, Takashi wasn't even at the press conference. On Boxing Day 1970, he was traded to the Yakult Atoms. As you can imagine, this whole saga was extremely controversial. Of course, people felt bad for Takashi after he'd been attacked, but on the other hand, he wouldn't have been attacked if he just grinned and bared it like every other kid did. Then again, the Whales had to know this would have blown up in their faces. They had enough problems getting prospects to sign in the first place, and Arakawa just wasn't some schmuck. He was a top prospect, and he'd made his intentions known before the draft. NPB would give Arakawa a 1-month suspension for attempting to circumvent the draft, but that'd be all, and Takashi would debut for the Atoms in 1971. He'd live up to his potential in 1972, but the attack eventually caught up with him. The blow to the back of the head had damaged his left eye's optical nerve, and he was rapidly losing sight in that eye. He tried batting left-handed to mitigate it, and the team even hired his stepdad to work it out with him. But it didn't work. By 1975, Takashi Arakawa had retired. The Whales, now called the Baystars, would not draft another Waseda grad until 2008, when they drafted Keijiro Matsumoto and Takeshi Yamada. You'd think the tumultuous tale of Arakawa would pump the brakes on any prospect trying this kind of chicanery in the future, but just 3 years after Arakawa called it quits, Suguru Egawa created a whole new shitstorm. Suguru Egawa was from the coastal city of Iwaki, Fukushima Prefecture. After moving to Tochigi to attend Sakushin High, he absolutely dominated the competition, tossing 9 no-hitters, 2 of which were perfect games, and he set several Koshin records, including striking out 14 batters in a game, 8 of which were in a row. Egawa was, naturally, on every team's list going into the 1973 draft, but Egawa, like Arakawa before him, was very single-minded about who he wanted to play for. Kyojin or bust. This is despite the fact that the Hankyu Braves, who probably would have ended up taking him, were gearing up for a dynasty. However, all that mattered to Egawa was that the Giants would be picking 10th, so he refused to declare for the draft and enrolled at Hosei University. At Hosei, he would keep up the pace, throwing 17 complete game shutouts and striking out 446 batters over the course of his 4-year career. Coming into the 1977 draft, the only thing standing between him and his Kyojin dreams was one club, the Fukuoka Crown Lighter Lions. The Lions were, to put it mildly, a poverty organization. To put it harshly, they were a fucking joke. They were the poorest team in the league, had barely any fans, and a cavernous ballpark. They may have been an absolute mess, but they were salivating at the chance to pick up an ace for the future. And when they were called forward to make the first pick of the draft, they naturally drafted Suguru Egawa, and Egawa immediately stonewalled them. When the media pressed him for why, he replied curtly, "Kyushu is too far away." A point he made immediately mute by jetting off to USC to be coached by Rod Dato, who'd worked with several MLB legends, most notably Tom Seaver. Later, he would state publicly that his real reason for refusing was that he wanted to play for the Giants, although he wasn't exactly closed off to other teams. Following his career, Egawa stated that the Giants would have been the ideal team, but he also would have taken deals with either the Tokyo Yakult Swallows or the freshly moved Yokohama Taiyo Whales. He wanted to stay in Kanto, and he wanted to play in Central League. Those were his 2 major demands. During the interim, the Lions would be bought by Seibu Group, who announced that they'd be moving the team to a freshly built stadium in Saitama Prefecture. On the surface, this should have been great for Egawa. While he'd still be in Pacific League, he'd have the opportunity to play in Kanto, and the Lions were now owned by the richest conglomerate in Japan, so he'd be paid handsomely too. But no. the fact that the Lions were playing in Pacific League was enough to exclude them outright. To Seibu's credit, they kept negotiations going with Egawa all the way to the deadline, but at midnight JST on October 20th, 1978, Seibu lost the right to negotiate with Egawa, and he'd be a free agent. Except no. On July 31st, NPB had amended its draft rules, stating that anyone who had attended high school or university in Japan was fair game to be drafted, even if they weren't currently in Japan. This rule was directly targeted at Egawa. Egawa had originally planned to remain in the United States till after the draft and then come back and sign with the Giants as a free agent, but now he had to hurry. Since he was technically a free agent and hadn't declared for the draft, Egawa flew back to Japan on November 20th to meet with Naka Funada, the headmaster of his old high school, and from there he'd be shuttled incognito to Yomiuri's headquarters, where at 9:30 in the morning, the day before the 1978 draft, Egawa signed with the Yomiuri Giants. The contract was taken to the NPB offices to be ratified, but NPB Commissioner Toshi Kaneko stated that the other 11 teams would need to agree to the contract before it could go through. Naturally, the other 11 teams, who thought Egawa was still in LA and had been blindsided by the news, outright refused to ratify the contract. The Giants immediately threatened legal action and filed an injunction in the Tokyo District Court to keep Egawa under contract, and the team would abstain from the 1978 draft, stating that Egawa was legally under contract and to have him be taken in the draft against his will was both illegal and immoral. The 1978 draft was also the first to use the current lottery system, where multiple teams can elect to go after the same player in any given round. The Yaku Cosmopolitan did a whole video where he goes into the ins and outs on how the draft works in detail, so I'll link that in the description. During the 1978 draft, despite Kyojin protests, 4 teams nominated Egawa in the first round: the Kintetsu Buffaloes, the Nankai Hawks, the Lotte Orions, and the Hanshin Tigers. Notably, none of these teams met Egawa's criteria for signing. Hanshin won the rights to negotiate with him in the lottery, but when they showed up to Funada's office the next day, they were stonewalled. "He can't see you," they were told. "He is already under contract." Yomiuri would immediately protest the draft, stating that it was invalid because they boycotted it. And Kaneko had thoroughly enough by this point, so he started mediating negotiations between the Giants and Tigers. The Giants could have Egawa, but only if they could trade for him. The Tigers initially called the Giants' bluff by asking for Sadaharu Oh, who the Giants had stolen from under their noses back in 1959. But the Giants outright refused to part with him, for obvious reasons. Eventually, the Giants were forced to part with 1977 Sawamura Award winner Shigeru Kobayashi, and by the end of the year, the deal was done. And Suguru Egawa, now forever branded as Dirty Egawa, was a Giant. This whole fiasco had several lasting impacts both inside and outside the baseball world. First, it nearly killed the whole draft. Egawa had some very powerful people backing him, including the aforementioned Funada, and challenged the draft as a whole on the floor of Parliament, as he felt it violated constitutional laws surrounding workers' rights because it forced multiple people to work for companies that they did not wish to work for. This had some truth to it, as at the time all NPB clubs were directly owned by corporations, so their players were technically employees of those corporations. But ultimately this didn't go anywhere. Seibu was also noticeably miffed by the whole situation and had come out strongly against the Giants for pulling this underhanded stunt. As a result, Nippon Television, partly owned by Yomiuri, would stop televising Seibu Lions games outside of the Pacific League playoffs and the Japan series. Another company that Seibu had problems with thanks to this whole situation was Mitsubishi. Wait, how? Well, it turns out that while Egawa was living in LA, he was living with a Japanese board member of Mitsubishi of America, a man who had gone so far as to try and take out a restraining order with the LAPD to stop Lions officials from contacting Egawa. Seibu's transit arm sold all their Mitsubishi buses and bought Nissan and Isuzu ones, and Seibu's department stores removed all Mitsubishi products from their shelves. This would continue until Yoshiaki Tsutsumi was removed from the company board after getting bought for forging invoices in the late 2000s. So after all this fallout, how did it go? Well, Shigeru Kobayashi would pick up his second Sawamura Award in 1979 with the Tigers, but would be out of baseball by 1983. 2 years before, the Tigers won their first and so far only Japan Series in 1985. Despite being handed a 2-month suspension by the league, Suguru Egawa would come out of the gate hot, and by 1981 he'd been named Central League MVP and have a Japan Series and 2 ERA titles under his belt. But after 1984 he'd fall off, and in 1987 he'd retire. Seibu, on the other hand, would go on to win Japan Series titles in 1982, 1983, 1986, and 1987, and then kept winning after Egawa retired. In 83 and 87, they did so by beating Egawa's Giants, and in those 2 series, Egawa would go a combined 0-for-3 with a 6.48 ERA, 3.93 FIP, and a 1.2 WHIP over 16 2/3 innings, including 2 humiliating performances in 1983, when the Lions put up a 6 spot in Game 1 and chased him after 2 innings, and then walked him off in Game 6. Egawa won the battle, but he did not win the war. And the Giants learned that if they wanted to try something similar in the future, they'd have to be smarter about it. PL Gakuen was a powerhouse in the 70s and 80s. PL Gakuen won the Summer Koshien tournament in 1978, 1983, 1985, and 1987, while finishing runner-up in 1970, 1976, and 1984. From 83 to 85, they were led by the KK duo, ace pitcher Masumi Kuwata and star slugger Kazuhiro Kiyohara. Both were frontrunners in the NPB draft, with several teams salivating at the chance to get either one of them. But before the draft, Masumi Kuwata held a press conference and said that he had decided to attend Waseda University and forego the draft. Waseda has always been a powerhouse school and was historically great at developing pitchers, so after 2 scandals in the last 15 years that were directly linked to teams refusing to respect players' choices, most teams decided to respect his wishes and go after Kiyohara. Kiyohara, for his part, wanted to play for the Giants. He had idolized Sadaharu Oh, and he wanted to be just like him. And getting the chance to play under him alongside Hara, Yoshimura, and Cromartie would have been a dream come true. The 1985 draft commenced, and teams put forward their first-round nominations. Kazuhiro Kiyohara was nominated by the Nankai Hawks, Nippon Ham Fighters, Chunichi Dragons, Kintetsu Buffaloes, Seibu Lions, and Hanshin Tigers. Notice an absence? Where are the Giants? Well, they shocked everyone by choosing Kuwata. Upon seeing the news, Kiyohara broke down in tears. Not only had the team he wanted rejected him, but his best friend had also just effectively used him as a decoy. Kuwata withdrew from Waseda University entrance exams immediately and signed with the Giants, causing most of the other teams in the league to cry foul about collusion, to which the Giants humbly asked for receipts. Technically, they'd done nothing wrong. Kuwata was never taken off the eligibility list, and he was always available to be selected. The other 11 teams had just chosen not to. Kiyohara ended up going to the Pacific League champion Seibu Lions in the lottery, and he would immediately start wrecking shop, becoming the 1B to Koji Akiyama's 1A on Invincible Seibu from his rookie season onwards. In his second season with the Lions, he got his revenge when the Lions took down the Giants in the 1987 Japan Series. Then they'd do it again in 1990. When he achieved free agency in 1997, Kiyohara would immediately sign with the Giants and remain with them until 2006, when he joined the Oryx Buffaloes. They'd win 2 titles together in 2000 and 2002, and they'd both have long, fruitful careers in NPB. As you can imagine, this kind of chicanery is a lot harder to pull in NPB these days. Nowadays, a player must submit a confidential professional aspiration report, where they detail who they'd ideally like to play for and teams they would not really like to play for, or whether or not they'd like to go to university or get a job outside of baseball. Those who wish to go to university must withdraw from the draft in order to reduce confusion. There's also a rule that prevents players from circumventing the draft by joining an indie ball or foreign pro team. Those who do must wait at least 2 years before re-entering the draft, or wait until they reach a certain age where they can sign as a free agent. People may whine about how restrictive these rules are on young players, but they wouldn't be so strict if these players and teams hadn't tried to game the system all these years ago. Now, I've said my piece, but I'm interested to know, how do y'all feel about this? Do you sympathize with Arakawa, Egawa, and or Kuwata chasing their childhood dream? Or do you think that they're selfish pricks who brought this on themselves? Or a little bit of both? The truth is never really black and white, so feel free to sound off in the comments. As always, I've been Gaijin Baseball. Peace.